The Startide Nexus is the name given to a stable corridor of subspace that was discovered by the Tau Empire. This corridor, similar to other celestial phenomena such as wormholes, allows those who travel through it to cross unimaginable distances in an incredibly short period of time. In this case, the Startide Nexus creates a link between the core sept worlds of the Tau Empire and the Nemyar Atoll, a region of space located to the galactic north of Ultima Segmentum. For the Tau, a civilization whose ships lack the long-distance, faster-than-light propulsion technology of other races, such as humanity or the Orcs, the discovery of the Nexus would prove to be invaluable, for it would allow the Tau to begin expanding into a region of the galaxy that would have otherwise taken them decades, if not centuries or even millennia to reach. But while it may be functionally identical to a spatial wormhole in pretty much every aspect, the Startide Nexus is not a natural phenomenon and was in fact brought into existence purely by accident. Prior to the launch of the Tau Empire's fourth sphere of expansion, the scientists of the Earthcast would begin development of what would become known as the AL-38 Slipstream Module, a device which would envelop a ship with a bubble of antimatter and in turn allow it to accelerate to such extreme velocities that it would be capable of penetrating through the very fabric of reality in a manner similar to that of a more traditional warp drive. The initial tests of the module proved to be incredibly successful, and the ships of the Fourth Sphere expansion fleet would be retrofitted with such devices at the behest of the Ethereal Council. Once the fleet had been amassed at Numenor Point, the Ethereal Council, in spite of the warnings and pleas made by the Earthcast, would order for the Slipstream modules to be activated en masse. However, such high quantities of antimatter would inadvertently result in the creation of a warp space rift, which dragged the entire Fourth Sphere fleet into the depths of the Immaterium. While the Fourth Sphere fleet was initially believed to have been destroyed in the ensuing chaos, prompting any further development of the Slipstream module to be halted indefinitely, they were in truth transported tens of thousands of light-years across the galaxy, with the Startide Nexus being created as an unintended byproduct of this calamity. The forces of the Fourth Sphere, led by Commander Jetstrike, would, upon rematerializing into real space, begin colonizing multiple worlds in addition to fortifying their side of the Nexus. Eventually, the Tau Empire would receive word of the Fourth Sphere's survival, and after discovering the location to their half of the Startide Nexus, a Fifth Sphere of expansion fleet, led by Commander Shadowsun, was tasked with making the journey through the Nexus and into the Nemyar Atoll. Under Shadowsun's leadership, the Fifth Sphere fleet, which by this point had absorbed the remnants of the Fourth into its ranks, began bringing more and more worlds into the fold of the Tau Empire, even going as far as to annex multiple worlds belonging to the Imperium of Man. However, a few scant months after their arrival within the Nemyar Atoll, Shadowsun's forces would encounter quite possibly the greatest threat that they had ever faced up until that point: the followers of the Chaos God Nurgle. A Death Guard warband, led by the Chaos Lord Horatius Glurtosk, would translate from the warp and into the Nemyar Atoll, before immediately beginning to strike at not only the various orbital platforms guarding the Startide Nexus, but even making planetfall upon the newly annexed Imperial world of Pekun, in order to corrupt and infect it in their patron god's name. The Tau in orbit would be swift in responding to the unexpected threat, and while they would succeed in destroying or crippling many of the lesser ships, they would ultimately prove to be incapable of halting the slow, implacable advance of the Death Guard, prompting Shadowsun to dispatch a messenger probe through the Nexus in order to warn the Tau Empire of the encroaching armada. Eventually, Shadowsun, along with a hand-picked team of alien auxiliaries which included a Kroot, a Nikasar and a Carpactin, would board Glurtosk's flagship, the Nephilim, in a last-ditch attempt to prevent the Death Guard from entering the Startide Nexus and reaching the very heart of the Tau Empire. While they would successfully make their way to the bridge and catch the Death Guard completely unaware, Shadowsun's team proved to be no match for the corrupted Astartes, with Shadowsun herself even having one of her feet sliced off at the ankle by the Chaos Lord's power scythe during the ensuing battle. Realizing that her team was hopelessly outmatched, Shadowsun, in desperation, destroyed a stained glass viewing window, with the resultant decompression dragging her and the surviving members of her team into the depths of space. Despite having bested the enemy commander, cohesion began to fracture within the ranks of the Death Guard, with several ships, under the advisement of the sorcerer Dimitris Thurglane, choosing to withdraw from the Nemia atoll in order to pursue other objectives. Glurtosk, however, would order for his ship to enter the Startide Nexus, intent on corrupting the very heart of the Tau Empire in Nurgle's name. While it initially appeared that Shadowsun's efforts were all for naught, it would be revealed that, much to the surprise and relief of the Tau, Glurtosk's ship never emerged from the other side of the Nexus. The reasoning for this was that, unbeknownst to most, the Death Guard were stopped by none other than the nascent goddess Tau Va, a deity that served as the living embodiment of the Tau Empire's philosophy of the greater good. Tau Va would then destroy the Nephilim, ensuring that her people would be spared from the ravages of the Plague God. But what could have happened if Tau Va didn't intervene? What if the forces of the Death Guard had managed to successfully pass through the Startide Nexus and began their assault upon the Tau Empire? One of the main factors in this regard would be the total number of Death Guard ships that managed to enter the Startide Nexus. According to the novel Shadowsun, the Patient Hunter, only 3 Death Guard vessels would successfully break through the Tau blockade: the capital ship, Nephilim, and a pair of escorts. While such a small force would be vastly outnumbered by any naval fleets tasked with protecting the Tau Empire from invasion, there are additional factors which need to be taken into account for this hypothetical event. The first of which is in regards to just how quickly the Tau could muster their defenses against an invading foe. While it is true that both sides of the Startide Nexus are heavily defended and that Shadowsun's forces were able to launch a probe to forewarn the rest of the Empire about a potential Death Guard breakthrough, the main problem the Tau would have is, simply put, the comparably slow speed of their ships. Should the Death Guard manage to safely make their way through the Startide Nexus, then they would emerge along the Tau Empire's border within the galactic east, close to the worlds of Kelshan, Autal, and Vashia. While these worlds are themselves relatively close to the Nexus's entrance, it could still take the Tau several days, if not weeks, for naval reinforcements to intercept the Death Guard. After all, according to the 8th edition Tau Codex, prior to the development of the AL-38 Slipstream module, it would take on average several months for Tau vessels to journey from one side to the Empire to another. Because of this, it's reasonable to assume that any naval assets being dispatched from the worlds such as Borkan, Viola, or Firios would simply take far too long to reinforce the defenders stationed at the Startide Nexus, let alone any worlds that may lie within the Death Guard's path of destruction. It's also important to note that the Nephilim itself, during its initial breakthrough within the Nemia atoll, sustained very little in the way of damage, despite being a priority target of the Tau's defenses. The reasoning for this would not only be due to the natural robustness of larger human-made battleships, but also due to the fact that the Nephilim bore the blessings of Nurgle, which in turn would have made it even tougher and more resilient than most other ships of its class. While Tau ships do often boast considerable firepower on average, many of these vessels, such as the Oris Eliath-class battleship or the Kirkath-class escort, lack the durability, speed, or maneuverability found within their human counterparts, effectively rendering such ships, for want of a better term, glass cannons. As such, it's likely that the Nephilim itself could easily break through any defensive blockade present upon emerging from the Startide Nexus, although whether or not any of its escorts would also survive such an encounter is another matter entirely. What also needs to be taken into account is where the Death Guard would choose to attack first upon reaching the Tau Empire. While the world of Autal would provide the closest target, its close proximity to Kelshan and Vashiar would make the prospect of assaulting the world an incredibly dangerous one due to the fact that the Tau would be able to reinforce Autal with nearby naval assets relatively quickly. Instead, it's possible that the Death Guard would choose to focus their efforts upon the world of Dianoi, which is somewhat isolated from the other sept worlds of the Tau Empire, meaning that it would take far longer for the Tau to respond and retaliate against any potential invasion. That being said, however, the world of Dianoi does lie within close proximity to that of Vespid, the aptly named homeworld of the Vespid species, who are themselves allies and auxiliaries of the Tau Empire. As such, if Dianoi were to be assaulted by the Death Guard, it's reasonable to assume that the Vespid would lend their aid to the Tau against such a threat. But seeing as how Horatius Glurtosk had intended to spread the taint of Nurgle throughout the very heart of the Tau Empire itself, then it's also possible, albeit a borderline suicidal prospect, that he would order his forces to set course directly for the Tau homeworld. Given that the world of Tau is not only the very cradle of the civilization, but also serves as the Empire's capital, it is, unsurprisingly, the single most heavily defended world within the entire Tau Empire. With this in mind, it's also fairly safe to assume that despite being able to deal considerable damage to the Tau fleet, attrition would eventually take its toll upon Glurtosk's fairly meager naval force. However, should the Death Guard succeed in making planetfall upon any of the core sept worlds of the Tau Empire, then the situation could very well play out differently. After all, it's worth remembering that an Astartes not only boasts greater size, strength, durability, speed, and reflexes when compared to a typical Tau fire warrior, but the Death Guard in particular, thanks to the blessings of Nurgle, are even tougher and more resilient still. While such gifts do make members of the Death Guard Legion slower than the average Space Marine, they are still capable of moving with incredible speed when needed. Indeed, it was due in part to Shadowsun underestimating just how fast a Plague Marine can truly be, which cost her her foot during her duel with Horatius Glurtosk. While the Death Guard would no doubt be heavily outnumbered by any Tau forces that they encounter, it's important to remember that even a single Space Marine can be an incredibly destructive and devastating force. As shown within the short story Redemption of Daleth, Durian, the chapter master of Scarlords, was shown to single-handedly butcher no less than 9 fire warriors in just a matter of seconds, and would go on to slaughter a number of Tau civilians as well as at least 1 Firecast cadet, before finally being slain when his exposed and unprotected skull was crushed by an XV-8 crisis battlesuit. Even the legendary Tau warrior, Shaskanthas, would go on to state that only a crisis suit, such as the aforementioned XV-8, could truly stand up to a Space Marine in one-on-one combat. But even though the Death Guard themselves would be few in number when compared to the armies of the Tau in this particular instance, it's possible that the Astartes could bolster their ranks via the use of demonic entities. While the Warband's chief sorcerer, Diminus Thurglane, would himself not make the journey through the Startide Nexus, it's possible that Glurtosk's flagship could have had at least 1 additional sorcerer on board with which to help summon demons of Nurgle into real space. While summoning rituals can technically be conducted without the use of a psyker, such individuals are often used to help accelerate such a process. Should the Death Guard succeed in summoning demons to fight alongside them, then such creatures could potentially wreak untold havoc upon the Tau. While demons can indeed be brought down through sheer overwhelming firepower, an asset that is indeed boasted by the Tau themselves lack the one weapon that is proven to be the most effective against them: the energies of the warp itself. Unlike numerous other races throughout the galaxy, such as the Eldari, Orcs and humans, the Tau currently sport little to no psychic potential, and as such are incapable of utilizing the talents of psychers, which the Tau themselves refer to as mind science, to banish demons from the material realm. That being said, however, the Tau Empire, as mentioned earlier, does make use of a number of alien auxiliaries, many of them being psychically sensitive in nature, such as the Nikasar, Carpacting, and even humans. The only issue in this regard would be how many, if any, such individuals would be present upon whatever sept worlds are unfortunate enough to bear the brunt of the Death Guard assault. But the biggest danger that the Death Guard pose to the Tau Empire isn't the unrelenting brutality of their warriors or the destructive potential of their weaponry, but something far more pervasive and insidious: disease. While many of the diseases spread by the followers of the Plague God are indeed curable through traditional medicinal means, there are an equal, if not greater number of contagions that are warp-based in nature. Because of their warp-based nature, these particular diseases, if left unchecked, can spread through outer world's populace at an alarming rate. The only areas that are traditionally unaffected by such warp-spawned plagues are places of worship and faith, such as, in the case of imperial worlds, shrines, churches, and cathedrals. However, the majority of the Tau Sept worlds appear to lack such locations due to their civilization being effectively atheistic in nature. The only major exceptions in this regard are those worlds whose population of alien auxiliaries treat the philosophical concept of the greater good as an actual religion, one that eventually resulted in the creation of the nascent goddess Tau Va. However, these cults dedicated to Tau Va, despite their rapidly increasing popularity, appear to still be relatively rare and seemingly confined to those worlds on the very fringes of Tau space. It should be noted, however, that Shadowsun herself did learn of the effects that Faith had on Nurgle's plagues during her own encounter with the Death Guard on Pecan, so it's likely that any warning she may have sent through the Startide Nexus could have contained this incredibly valuable piece of intel. In either case, a mass outbreak of plague upon a sept world could prove devastating to the Tau race, perhaps even more so than the races such as humanity or the Eldari. The reasoning for this is due to the fact that, according to Shadowsun, the patient hunter, the Tau, upon settling upon a new world, will seek to eliminate all harmful pathogens and diseases and will even use such an act as a bargaining chip to help convince other races to integrate themselves into the fold of the Tau Empire. However, such an act could potentially have the side effect of drastically weakening the immune system of the average Tau civilian due to their bodies not being exposed to any potential infectious or viral agents, which in turn would help build up their natural immunity to disease. Admittedly, though, it is entirely possible that the Earth caste, prior to rendering a particular pathogen extinct, would develop and mass-produce various vaccines and antibiotic serums as a contingency plan should a potential outbreak occur at any point within the future for one reason or another, although there is no way of knowing for certain. Should the Tau prove incapable of halting the spread of disease, then they may be forced to take drastic action and subject any contaminated worlds to concentrated saturation bombings. While the Tau would normally consider such an act extreme, if not wasteful or even barbaric, reducing a sept world to little more than a scorched, lifeless wasteland may ultimately prove to be their best option in halting the spread of Nurglite corruption. Ultimately, though, while the Death Guard are without a doubt incredibly dangerous foes, their low numbers would all but guarantee that they would sooner or later succumb to attrition. The only real questions are in regards to just how much damage the Tau Empire would sustain from their assault and if the race could ever truly recover from such a wanton carnage, corruption, and devastation. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching!